You're watching Going Underground. I'm Afshin Rattansi. Every Monday, Wednesday and Saturday, we bring you the stories that really matter in the United Kingdom for those of you wishing to question more. Coming up in the show, after reports in the last few days of ISAF drones causing yet more civilian casualties in Afghanistan, why are we already working on a new killer prototype? And a so-called Freedom to Speak Up review will report next year on NHS whistleblowing. But what role does whistleblowing play in corruption at banks, pharmaceutical companies and the UN? We talk to the Government Accountability Project. Plus, MPs accuse the head of tax at accountants PwC of lying to them. All this and more on today's Going Underground. Away from today's grilling of Home Secretary Theresa May about UK facilitation of US torture, there has been great news for the British film industry. Benedict Cumberbatch, Ralph Fiennes and Helen Mirren are among the many British stars nominated for the Golden Globes, which the media says predict the Oscars. But why does British media always celebrate appreciative votes at US institutions when it comes to films? Doesn't one particular film come to mind this month? One that won 5 Academy Award nominations, let alone 4 nominations at the Golden Globes. One starring this woman, Jessica Chastain. That's the one. The film is directed by this woman, Catherine Bigelow, who is lauded as a great director, except that the whole premise of her film, Zero Dark 30, that US torture revealed where Osama bin Laden was, we now know nonsense. Here she explains how American enhanced interrogation, or torture, led to finding Osama bin Laden.
It was a lot of elements that got you to that house in Abbottabad. I mean, there's obviously, as the film shows, some enhanced interrogation.
No, it wasn't. The CIA were using the media to lie, seemed to be the implication from the head of the CIA torture inquiry.
The CIA provided extensive inaccurate information about the program and its effectiveness to the White House, the Department of Justice, Congress, the CIA Inspector General, the media, and the American public.
Not just the media, Hollywood as well, if Zero Dark 30 was anything to go by. When CIA Chief John Brennan repeated Bigelow's claims at a press conference, Senator Feinstein live tweeted, "Study definitively proves enhanced interrogation techniques did not lead to bin Laden," page 378 of the Senate report. The NATO-led International Security Assistance Force is conducting an investigation into the latest reports of civilian casualties after drone strikes in Afghanistan, but it hasn't stopped plans by Britain to work on yet more drones. To talk about who we are cooperating with in the development of drones is the Director of War and Want, John Hilary. War and Want has just published a report entitled Killer Drones. Welcome back to Going Underground, John. So, what country are we working with on drones?
Well, we're working with Israel. I mean, Israel is now the #1 exporter of drones around the world. They've taken over that particular niche in the market because Israel has used drones now since the 1970s against the Palestinian people, against the Lebanese civilian population. And they, in a way, have field-tested drones. They're the ones which can say, we've done it, we've used them in real-life situations, we've seen how effective they can be. The problem is, of course, when they say effective, they're talking about the killing of civilians, Palestinian and Lebanese civilians, in huge numbers. We saw that just this year with the newest attack on Gaza. 2,000 people killed, many hundreds of them as a result of drone attacks.
And no impact on policy from, I mean, if you have even Amnesty International saying it's war crimes, the MOD just ploughing on.
Absolutely, and we know that there are meant to be restrictions on any form of arms trade with Israel. We've already had that here in Britain, and the previous government said they cannot take any Israeli assurances anymore that the weaponry won't be used against Palestinian civilians. Despite that, there are still countless licenses being granted every year by the British government to allow this arms trade with Israel to continue.
How are we sharing the technology then with this company, Elbit Systems? Is that the company?
That's right. I mean, it's a two-way thing. There are some components which are exported from Britain to be used in Israeli weaponry, but the main thing that we're focusing on is the use of Israeli technology in the development of the new generation of British drones. And particularly that, as you say, comes from Elbit, which is the biggest private arms company in Israel. And they're producing for the template for the new British Watchkeeper drone, as it's called. The Watchkeeper drone is based on the The Hermes 450, it's the particularly well-used Israeli drone. It's effectively what they call their workhorse, the drone they use most in all of their military operations. And that's going to form the basis of the new Watchkeeper British drone. And that's unacceptable. I mean, how can we have the new generation of British weaponry based on this technology which has been field tested on Palestinian civilians? That's
but you
unacceptable.
haven't found, Warren One hasn't found a memo, smoking gun memo at the Ministry of Defence leaked to you saying this has been battle tested on children and that's why it's worked so well, Britain, the British taxpayer, should fund it?
Oh no, I mean it's absolutely clear that the Israeli military has made no secret at all of the fact that the Hermes 450 has been used in the military operations against Palestinian civilians and has been responsible for countless deaths. It's an open piece of information. So the British government knows that, and yet they're still ploughing ahead with this contract with a company which we believe should be completely beyond the pale. It's unacceptable.
So when ISAF kills civilians in the Afghanistan-Pakistan region, they're also using Israeli drone technology because Israel is so expert at the use of it, as it were.
I mean, most technology stems from Israel in respect of drones. There are also other manufacturers in the States, and certainly when it comes to ISAF operations, we know that UK and US forces are using the Reaper drone, which comes out from the US side. But I think the key point here is that in Afghanistan and in the tribal areas of Pakistan, you're seeing exactly the same consequences of drone strikes. Huge numbers of civilian casualties, what they used to call collateral damage. Huge numbers of civilian casualties. We just had one new report which said that in order to kill one of the Taliban leaders they were targeting in drone strike after drone strike, they ended up killing 164 civilians just in targeting one man.
And do you see any difference as the public at large becomes more aware of civilian casualties, let alone people in the MOD and the Foreign Office? Any reluctance now to keep on investing in new programs?
Well, I think there's two sides of it. Firstly, there's a massive public outrage against the continuing arms trade with Israel. That's absolutely clear. And in the wake of the horrific attacks we saw this summer against Gaza, people are out on the streets again and again and again. So I think that there's a gradual public feeling that this is the unacceptable modern face of warfare, if there's any acceptable face of warfare. These are the sort of material weapons that we don't want to be using or developing or putting as the future of our new strike capability.
But how can organizations like yours keep fighting against the use of drones when in the political domain drones seem like a gift, because the whole boots on the ground problem when it comes to interventions by the British Army and Navy and Air Force, they seem to be an ultimate panacea here.
And that's part of the problem, isn't it? I mean, having drone technology makes it so easy to go to war. It's as if you have the sort of casual imperialism where you can just press a button from sitting in Lincolnshire in an RAF bunker and suddenly the war is being done for you by a remote control at the other side of the world.
Let alone moral imperatives here. What's the tactical problem of Britain using drones in terms of blowback to British interests abroad?
Well, we're seeing the whole blowback now from the Iraq invasion and occupation, and that was something which the CIA had warned about 10 years ago, that you're creating the material circumstances for there to be another wave of blowback, just as from the Mujahideen who fought against the Soviet Union back in the old days, you saw it sweep into Algeria and then into France. Now we're seeing the knock-on effects from the occupation, the invasion of Iraq. So that was Afghanistan, this is from Iraq. And I think that is absolutely allied to this new face of war, the idea that war is no longer going to be fought in the old ways with, as you say, the mass occupation, boots on the ground, but instead it's going to be either done by technology, by drones, or by privatization and by stealth. So the increased use of private military companies, the mercenary groups who've mushroomed in Iraq and Afghanistan, they're now being sent in to do the dirty work, because of course if they end up being killed in a foreign operation, you don't have any of the problems of body bags coming back draped in the flag and people genuinely feeling unhappy about the idea of Britain being overstretched around the world. So this is the unacceptable new face of war, which people are trying to say we don't want anything to do with that.
But when politicians and military officials look at the new Tyrannus drone, very, dare I say, glamorous pictures of this new technology, do you think they understand that collateral damage caused by these new drones could cause terrorist attacks in Britain?
I think that they are hearing the fact that there's a big downside to building up this new military technology which is going to extend our reach everywhere. I mean, the Tyrannus super drone is the next one on the horizon. It flies.
What is that?
It flies at supersonic speeds. It's able to take out, you can even make its own flight paths and will be able to identify its own targets. And at that point, people are saying, well, this is actually just like the Terminator films. You've got machines which are able to take out their own targets without any human supervision. That is absolutely unacceptable.
Now, there's that famous legend about the invention of the crossbow when people said, this will end war. Now, countries like China, other countries building laser-guided weapons to attack drones. Is that the next stage?
Well, I think the idea that, you're going to come to the end of a war is absolute nonsense. We're still here. 2014, it's the 100th anniversary of the war to end all wars. And of course, we know that the First World War just spawned an entire century of carnage. So I think there's no myth anymore that people would believe about that. But I do think what's interesting is that as you develop this technology, you begin to start putting in train a new type of warfare, whereby it's easier and easier to sort of commit these war crimes, and there's less and less accountability for it. And that, I think, is where you begin to see the shift now in the moral code. People saying, well, for example, the new British understanding of targeted assassinations, that came through drone warfare. The idea that you can use drones, even outside theatres of war, you can use drones to target individuals who you want to assassinate. Well, that was completely beyond the pale just 12, 15 years ago.
But is the argument still difficult to make because in an age of austerity, drones seem cheaper, let alone the lives of British servicemen and women, they seem cheaper than new tactical missiles, new fighter aircraft, let alone the aircraft for our new aircraft carrier.
But that's appalling, isn't it? I mean, if we're saying what's great about drones is that it enables us to kill more people more cheaply, I mean, it's an absolutely degraded argument for anyone to use. And in fact, the politicians realise that they're going to look unacceptable if they do use that in public. I think all of these things stack up for us. The fact that these are indiscriminate weapons, the fact that they can lead to enormous blowback, the fact that we're going into bed with Israel, which has field tested them on Palestinian and Lebanese civilians, all of those things are stacking up to get people into a position where they see drones as the new landmines. They want to get rid of them. They consider them to be unacceptable new forms of technology, and I think that's why people are on our side.
John Hilary, thank you. Coming up in part 2 of Going Underground, what to do if you need to blow the whistle in your workplace, and what happened to the Guardian newspaper just hours after its editor-in-chief retired. All this and more after the break. Last night's Sports Personality of the Year will have been keenly watched by Viscount Rothermere journalist Max Hastings. He wasn't rooting for a certain Formula One Mercedes-Benz driver.
Don't wrap yourself in the flag if you won't pay UK tax. Max Hastings blasts Monaco-based Lewis Hamilton.
Hang on a minute, Hastings, you're writing for the Daily Mail. Viscount Rothermere, who owns the Daily Mail, has a family notorious for legal tax avoidance. From Jersey to Bermuda, the Rothermeres have been rightly trying to minimise expenditure on tax. As for UK expenditure on the war on terror, the Murdoch Sun has never been interested, preferring to target immigrants. But what's this?
Jihadi John brandishes knife in latest photo.
That's Murdoch speak for the man who beheads people in ISIS videos. But anyway, so what?
A new photo claiming to show Islamic State executioner Jihadi John is still alive and well has emerged.
But who said he wasn't?
Jihadi John hit in US airstrike.
That would be the Murdoch Sun from a few weeks before the other headline. Why do any journalism at all, in fact, as one can just publish unsubstantiated claims and then refute them in future issues of the paper? Speaking of issues, The Guardian's editor-in-chief Alan Rusbridger has just stepped down after 2 decades at the top of editorial at the Guardian Media Group, infamous for overseeing the publishing of articles against left-wing governments in Latin America. The tide turned hours after his departure.
US agency infiltrated Cuban hip-hop scene to spark youth unrest.
Shock horror. The Guardian publishes claims that the USA has been using agency US Aid and contractor Creative Associates International to undermine the Cuban government. After this epiphany, the Barclay twins telegraph on Obama's disastrous hostage rescue operation is easier to understand.
Yemen's al-Qaeda blames Obama for failed hostage rescue.
Well, who else would al-Qaeda blame things on? Does the Telegraph not realize that al-Qaeda doesn't really like America? In fact, it blames America for everything. Few international whistleblowing organizations in the world can boast of victories such as those of the Government Accountability Project. From bailed-out banks to big pharmaceutical companies to the war on terror to the United Nations, GAP has been a force to be reckoned with, protecting more than 5,000 whistleblowers since its founding in Washington, D.C. in 1977. With me is its Executive Director, Bea Edwards. Welcome, Bea Edwards, to Going Underground. So, the austerity cuts here because of the failures of the banks. Your organization, the Government Accountability Project, you've been exposing quite a few scandals in the banking system. Let's start with Deutsche Bank, which has big offices here in the City of London.
Well, a couple of years ago, Eric Ben-Artzi, who had been what they call a quant at Deutsche Bank, came to us. And a quant is a quantitative analyst who keeps account of what the assets and the equities of the bank are, what the risks are, how to manage the risk. And he was specialized in risk management.
They're in Wolf of Wall Street, the Scorsese movie.
Yes, and he realized at a certain point that Deutsche Bank had accumulated so much risk that it was potentially insolvent if there were problems with the assets at any point.
$10 billion, £8 billion or something. And so he came to the Government Accountability Project? Or?
Well, first he went to the Securities and Exchange Commission, and he also made a disclosure inside the bank, as most whistleblowers do. 95% of whistleblowers go to someone inside their institution before they go outside. But by the time he came to us, he had already been identified as a whistleblower and targeted for reprisal.
You think it's slightly different in the United States because there is some money that you get. Here, it's actively discouraged.
Well, at the time he made his disclosure, there were not yet any payments legalized for whistleblowing. And in fact, most whistleblowers, and there are surveys that demonstrate this, make their disclosures because they want something to change, not because they're going to make some money. And they very, very rarely come out ahead.
It's a moral imperative. And when I say that it's actively discouraged here, it's been seen by different government departments. It's also pharmaceutical companies that come to you.
Yes, we had a whistleblower named David Graham who reported that Vioxx was, as he called it, the painkiller that kills because of the rate of heart attacks as a side effect from the drug. And the pharmaceutical company was Merck, and Merck had suppressed evidence about how dangerous the drug was.
Now, one of the most shocking whistleblowers of recent times with GAP relates to a war in Yugoslavia that Britain was involved in. Tell me about the United Nations corruptions that GAP have been trying to analyze and trying to expose.
Well, one of our clients was Jim Wasserstrom, and he was the anti-corruption officer in Kosovo for the United Nations. And he discovered a $500 million kickback scheme that he said involved high-level Kosovo officials and UN officials. And the reprisal against him was ferocious. He was sacked by the UN, his apartment was searched, his car was searched, and he left Kosovo in flight in fear of his physical safety.
I mean, all around the world, the United Nations has offices. If someone in Britain who has been working at a UN office or has seen corruption at the UN, how difficult is it to whistleblow when it comes to the United Nations internal procedures?
It is extremely risky because, and many people realize this, intergovernmental organizations like the United Nations have no they are not obliged to respond to national legal regimes. They have sovereign immunities like a diplomat does, like an embassy does. Only an embassy, unlike the United Nations, is subject to the laws of its own country, whereas the United Nations has only its own internal justice system, which is compromised by politics, by cronyism, by internal influences that you would have in any institution.
And what about the culture of fear then? Because we have surveys here in Britain saying about 40% of Ministry of Defence employees feel unsafe even about making a complaint. And it's more or less half-half when it comes to them feeling that they're able to expose malpractice of any kind.
Well, many of them have probably witnessed or kept track of the case of Tom Drake, who is one of our clients. And Tom worked at the NSA proper. He was not a contractor, and he exposed gross waste and abuse, the use of a surveillance system, which was really a boondoggle and would have been unconstitutional if it had worked. But Drake was prosecuted by the Justice Department and investigated for 4 years. His house was raided, every piece of paper was taken, every computer, every phone. He was subject to surveillance all the time during 4 years, and he was professionally ruined. So I imagine people inside the Defense Department seeing that would have second thoughts about going to any internal authority or external authority with a disclosure of wrongdoing. And Tom went to the Inspector General at the Defense Department, but his name was turned over to his superiors and he was made available for retaliation.
With Britain's special relationship with the United States, that sends a chilling message over here to Whitehall that we should be government departments using different laws.
You're right, there is a reason in Britain to be concerned about what happened in the United States, because one of the disclosures that Snowden made was the very, very close cooperation between what they call the Five Eyes, the countries that exchange excuse me, raw data about their citizens, one with the other. So if it's illegal for the United States to put citizens under surveillance who are not suspected of anything, then the British intelligence community can do it and turn the data over, and vice versa. The United States intelligence community would turn its data on British citizens over to GCHQ.
And just finally, one whistleblowing case involving healthcare, which is, of course, is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Tell me about John Parsons, a British citizen, and the Global Fund to Fight AIDS.
John Parsons was the Inspector General at the Global Fund, which is supposed to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria in developing countries. And he took evidence and disclosures from people who came to his office and investigated. But the Global Fund promotes itself as transparent and accountable, and it really was not interested in hearing about corruption in grants and projects and programs that it was funding. And so Parsons was subject to reprisal, and he was terminated in November of 2012, really for doing his job too well.
So British whistleblowers could go to the Government Accountability Project as well as American citizens?
Yes, we have an international program, and we work with people in other countries and with whistleblowers at international organizations like the World Bank, the IMF, the United Nations, the Global Fund, all of them.
Well, our viewers will know who to write to. Bea Edwards, thank you.
Thank you.
Cynics might have thought that last week's Public Accounts Committee meeting wouldn't see MPs question accountancy giant PwC too harshly. After all, as going underground has been revealing, both Labour and the Tories have been financially favoured by the company. But last Monday, the committee was in a feisty mood with PwC's head of tax, Kevin Nicholson. The tax guru was grilled over Luxembourg tax structures after hundreds of documents were leaked showing the tiny state was facilitating tax avoidance for over 1,000 multinationals. The arrangements, though legal and signed off by the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg, were forcefully questioned by committee chair Margaret Hodge. She told PwC's Kevin Nicholson,
"It's very hard for me to understand that this is nothing other than a mass marketed tax avoidance scheme.
And this wasn't the first time PwC tax chief Kevin Nicholson had appeared before the committee.
I think I've got a very simple question for you, is that did you lie when you gave evidence to us on January the 31st?
The man who worked as a tax inspector for HMRC in the 90s denied the accusation outright. And he said all PwC's tax service schemes relating to UK companies had been disclosed to HMRC. PwC has been saying for over a year that
to succeed, businesses must be agile, ready to respond to change, to capitalise on opportunities and navigate risks.
So perhaps they're already ahead of the so-called Google tax curve. It came as a surprise, though, to see The Guardian publishing the revelations of the Luxembourg deals. While it did disclose that its parent company, the Guardian Media Group, had been involved in a Luxembourg structure, it failed to mention that GMG is a client of PwC, to which it paid £500,000 this year for, that's right, tax advice. Going Underground approached The Guardian for comment. They said,
Guardian Media Group uses PwC, one of the world's leading accountancy firms, as its auditor and for other financial advice. This is fully disclosed in the GMG accounts.
That's it for today's show. Join us on Wednesday, though, when we speak to a barrister who was once Director of Intelligence in the IRA. In the meantime, connect to us via Twitter, Facebook, SoundCloud and email. And don't forget RT UK News with Bill Dodd every weekday evening at 6, 8, 9 and 10. See you on Wednesday.
If you are born in the village, like my village, and you have the color which I have, for sure, you have to suffer. People think that we do not die. People are being hunting us, people are being chopped our body parts. We are being isolated because of our skin color.
They decide what you eat, what you drink, which drugs you use, and you agree.
It's all about limiting your choices. The government wants to make those choices for you. They want to take away your freedom to choose.
They set standards, and you follow them.
A few companies control everything. There's only a small group of agribusiness companies that control the entire food production.
It always, always, always hurts small producers and helps the large producers.
Do they care about our safety or about theirs?
Just to be in the business of reselling food others have already manufactured and put in the marketplace.
Is it freedom or they dreamt of a land in which life should be better, richer, fuller, for everyone, with opportunity for each, according to ability or achievement. They should have been welcomed as heroes.
I came home, there was no follow-up call, there was no check to see if I was okay. My insurance had been canceled.
They had to begin a new battle in their very own country.
I lost the sight of my left eye, 3/4 of my right, and I lost my left leg.
They have no status. They're not military, they don't have rank, they're not in uniform, they are looked upon as slaves.
This is a normal day during an escalation in Gaza.
This is serious and people will have been killed right now.
If we come out right onto the roof now. Wow. That's another explosion over there. There's another interception over there. Everything is deadly quiet.
The blue dot is us, and we're surrounded by Ukraine on all three sides. And actually, here we are at the border.
Right here. A shell landed right here.
In this kilometer that is around is that you can see several pieces of the aircraft.
Do we have to remember that almost 300 people died, 295 to be precise. That was the site of especially intense bombing by Ukrainian forces just on Tuesday.
A lot of bodies have been found. The Organization of the Security Council of Europe.
We chase profit.
Very large, very attractive, and now very globally recognized source of oil for the world into the future.
The world's cheapest and best petroleum deposits have been mined out. We have to use more energy to get this energy.
Industries grow like cancer.
Each of these squares is 10 kilometers square, and this whole area is slated to be mined out. That's our drinking water, that's our wildlife, that's everything, that's our fishery.
We can't stop.
This is the end game. When it takes 2 tons of sand to make 1 barrel of oil, you know you're at the bottom of the 9th inning, and that's where we're at.
We kill ourselves.
I'm Marinade. Join me on Boom Bust for in-depth, impartial, and en vogue financial reporting, commentary, interviews, and much, much more. Only on Boom Bust and only on RT.
An armed organization is bankrolled by a state or, a very wealthy organization or individual. I mean, in the case of the Mujahideen, we know that the CIA was involved, but so was Saudi Arabia. So you can have, more than one sponsor.